This is how I set up an order when I first get an order and how I begin to cut it. This is an order I just shipped out earlier this week. This is from one of my longtime customers, and she just sent me an email rather than filling out any kind of an order form or anything. She just sent me an email because she kind of knows what I need after all these years of sewing for her girls. So you'll notice on here that I circled skirt length and total length, and that's because she wants them a little bit longer than normal. So I just do that to remind myself so I don't make a mistake when I cut. I also circled style 1. She did tell me that. She didn't tell me how she wants it to fit, which is fine. Normally, if somebody doesn't tell me how they'd like the suit to fit, I just kind of cut it so it finishes about an inch smaller than their body measurements. So what I do first is choose the size of pattern that I want. And the first thing I look at in order to do that, the most important measurement, is the height. And you'll see here that this young lady is 57.5 inches high. So what I'm going to do is look over here on my size chart. And normally this is hanging up above my cutting table, but I brought it down here just so I can switch back and forth between the two. And you'll see that for her height, she's kind of right between a 10 and a 12. So I'm going to look at her other measurements. Her chest is 27 and her hip is 30. So let's look back on here, and you'll see that for a size 10, she fits perfectly in those two measurements, the 27 and the 30. So that's the pattern that I'm going to choose for her. If I chose a 12, I would have to do so much more adjusting to size it down to fit her around. So the reason you want to choose your pattern based on the height is because of the bodice length. That's like one of the most important measurements. If the bodice is too short or too long, it's going to look bad, it's not going to fit right, it's going to be uncomfortable. So she's size 10 is 56, and she's a little taller than that. So what I did when I cut this was I just added about 3/8 of an inch or so to the bottom of the bodice, and that will ensure that it fits her well lengthwise too. So that's the best size to choose for this young lady. Now what I did, I make notes for myself here, so when I'm cutting it, it's easy for me to just reference what I'm going to do. So for her chest, 27 inches, if I'm going to fit it an inch smaller, that means I want it to be 26 inches when it's done. And in order to do that, I have to cut it 6.75 inches. Her waist is pretty small for a size 10. The size 10 waist is usually 25 inches, but we can fit that. Just cut it a little smaller. So we're going to cut that so it finishes at 22, which is 5.75 inches. Now the hip measurement, typically you want the hip measurement to be at least 3 inches larger than the measurement. Her hip is 30 inches, so I want it to be at least 33 inches when it finishes, and that is 8.5. And I'll explain what these measurements kind of mean when I show you how to cut in just a bit. It's fine if the hip is bigger than that. You don't want it way bigger, but you want it at least 3 inches larger. So I just write this down just to remind myself to just measure that and check that it's at least 8.5, because you wouldn't want the hip too snug. So that is how I set up my basic cutting instructions for myself when I get an order. And then again, I just take this order sheet and I put it right above me on my cutting wall, and then all I have to do is just look up and all those measurements are right there.